Dr. David Glasser says it's been a while since he has spoken to his nephew, but this did probably get his attention. Quote, "Stephen Miller is an immigration hypocrite. I know because I'm his uncle." Dr. Glasser wrote this open letter of sorts about his nephew last summer. Now that Stephen Miller's big new idea is to stop refugees from entering this country at all, and now that we have had a renewed national convulsion over the conditions in which asylum seekers and immigrants are being held, we asked Dr. Glasser if he might want to come in and talk about this matter again. Dr. Glasser is a retired neuropsychologist, and he's come into the studio tonight to be here. Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Good to be here, Rachel. What should we talk about?
Well, did you ever get a response from your nephew after you first spoke out about this last year?
No, I'm a persona incommunicado.
Yeah. You were so strong in your telling of not only your personal criticism of the Trump administration's policies, but about how it relates to your family and what it would mean for Stephen Miller. I imagine that you thought you could maybe touch his heart, because otherwise the need to make it personal must have just been difficult and painful.
Listen, I think people understand cruelties are being enacted, but people don't respond much to a list of statistics. I think what people respond to is a story, a personal story. What hope I had of my nephew being touched by his own history was not very high to start with. He's made it his entire career, and his entire persona is built on this particular issue. What I hope to do is I hope to raise other people who have the same history I do, and which I suspect you do too, frankly. All these people have come into this country. The question is, why did I write this piece? Why isn't everybody writing this piece?
There is renewed national concern right now over the treatment of immigrants and asylum seekers, and particularly kids being held on the border. Obviously, some of those stories are devastating, but I imagine it may be heartening to you to see renewed concern, to see the investigative work happening, to see people protesting, to see people holding vigils.
People care, as it turns out. Once you break it away from the idea of there being thousands and thousands of people who are being damaged and injured and hurt, break it down to individual people in individual cases, it touches people, and people will stand up and do the right thing. If they have the essential moral values and they know what to do, they'll do it.
I wonder, given your family connection to Mr. Miller and his identified role as the sort of draconian leader of the most hardline policies here, I wonder what you make of what appears to be the political calculation by, presumably your nephew, definitely by the Trump administration as a whole, that harshness toward immigrants, that deliberate cruelty toward immigrants, that terrible conditions in which immigrants are being held, redounds to the president's political benefit.
Well, let's break it down to the simple political calculus, as it has recently come to the attention of the United States Supreme Court with regard to voter suppression action taken by the Republican Party. The Republican Party has made the observation, as have demographers, that within the next 20 or 40 years, the United States will go from being a white majority country to being a white plurality country. So that makes, as it turns out, the people who are not predominantly of European background are less likely to vote for Republicans than for Democrats. This, of course, makes it problematic for them if they anticipate remaining in positions of power in order to advance their particular agenda. Accordingly, it is not worthwhile for them to allow people into the country or to allow people to gain citizenship who may not be members of their party in the future. This is not very hard to figure out, and it kind of all boils down to that.
The part of it that I find hard just to stomach, just viscerally, is the idea that you would not just be trying to deny the numbers in terms of immigrants who would eventually get citizenship and the right to vote, but that you would somehow galvanize native-born American citizens, and specifically white Americans, to excite them to vote for people who are being deliberatively and performatively cruel towards non-white people, that it would sort of tap some sort of latent racist hate-mongering among a white population that might make it easier to elect a Republican president.
What's equally repugnant is the assumption, apparently, among the Trump administration, that somehow the majority of white Americans are racist, when I don't believe that to be the case. But that being perhaps their own personal motivations, they may project that belief onto other people who do not share those feelings. Now, Mr. Trump obviously owns that brand. He's proud of it. He's not ashamed of it. He doesn't know what the word shame means. The last time, I'm old enough to remember, you probably are not, the last time that a major presidential candidate ran on an overtly racist platform was George Wallace back in 1968. I thought we had somehow as a nation grown beyond that and repudiated it. But now we see that Mr. Trump and his minions have legitimized race hatred as a means of sustaining and gaining political power and influence, which, by the way, is not a really very new phenomenon in this country either, or in other European countries.
Dr. David Glasser is a retired neuropsychologist. He's the uncle of Stephen Miller, White House advisor. Sir, thank you for coming in. I really appreciate it. I know it's not an easy thing to talk about. Thanks.
Thanks
We'll be
for
right back.
having me.
Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.